The last box wasn't heavy. It was the emotional weight of it that made my arms ache. I slid the packing tape with a utility knife, the sound echoing in the unfamiliar quiet of my new home. This place smelled of fresh paint and new carpet, not a decade of shared memories, fading perfume and the faint lingering scent of her favorite lavender-scented candles. I stood in the living room of my new 2-bedroom townhouse, a space I had chosen for its silence, for its security, for its absolute lack of ghosts. Today was the first full day of my new life. At 38 years old, I was starting over. Outside, the sun was setting over Summit Creek Estates. The name was a little pretentious, but I hadn't paid for the name. I'd paid for the gate, a solid black iron barrier that only opened with a resident's key card. It was a filter, a statement that from this point forward, access to my life was by invitation only. It had been a very long year getting to a place where I could even think that, let alone believe it. I reached into the box. My fingers brushed against the cool glass of a picture frame. I pulled it out. It was a photo of us on a beach vacation. We're both smiling, squinting in the bright sun, her head resting on my shoulder. Forever ended a year ago. Suddenly, brutally, and without negotiation. After that, our home became a museum of a life I used to have, a place where every object held a memory that could bring me to my knees. The breaking point came 6 months in. I was cleaning out a closet and found a receipt from a coffee shop tucked inside one of her books. On the back, in her familiar looping handwriting, she'd written a grocery list. Milk, eggs, bread, and that fancy ice cream you like. I just broke. Sitting on the floor holding that tiny slip of paper, I knew I couldn't stay. The house wasn't helping me heal. It was an anchor holding me in the harbor of my grief. I had to cut the rope. I carried the frame over to the new mantelpiece. For a year, I couldn't look at this picture without a crushing weight on my chest. But now, in this new place, the feeling was different. The sadness was still there, a dull ache, but it was mingled with a quiet warmth. It was a memory, not a haunting. I set it down, adjusting it until it was perfectly centered. This new home wasn't about erasing her. It was about finding a new way to live with her memory, a way that allowed for peace. I took a deep breath. The silence in this house wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the old one. This was a chosen silence, the sound of a new beginning. I had my home, my privacy, my gate. I had finally, after a year of drowning, found a shore. I thought naively that the hard part was over. I had no idea that the biggest threat to my newfound peace was already packing her bags, convinced she had a key to a house I no longer owned and a claim to a life that was no longer hers to control. I was in the kitchen of the old house, the 3-bedroom, 2-bath tomb I was still inhabiting. I was just staring into the refrigerator, not really hungry, not really seeing anything. It was a common state for me back then. The house was quiet, but it was the loud kind of quiet. The kind where you can hear the dust settling, the hum of the appliances, the phantom echo of a laugh in a room you just left. I was trying to decide if I had the energy to make a sandwich when I heard the sound of the front door opening. My heart seized for a split second, that familiar stupid jolt of hope that it was her, that this whole nightmare year had been a dream. But the sound of the footsteps was wrong, heavier, slower, deliberate. I closed the refrigerator door and walked into the front hall. And there she was, my mother-in-law. She was 64 but carried herself with the unshakable authority of a drill sergeant. She had a key. Of course she had a key. We'd given it to her years ago for emergencies. I was about to learn that she and I had very different definitions of the word emergency. Behind her on the porch, I could see 2 large suitcases and a stack of cardboard boxes. My brain couldn't quite process the image. I just stood there confused. "Hey," I said, my voice sounding weak. What's all this? Are you going somewhere?" She smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a smile of grim satisfaction, of a decision made and executed. She closed the door behind her with a definitive click, shutting out the rest of the world. "Oh, Isaiah, you poor thing," she said, her voice dripping with a thick, syrupy pity that made my skin crawl. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm coming home." I just stared at her. The words didn't connect. Home. This was my home. It had been our home. It wasn't hers. "I don't understand," I managed to say. She patted my arm, a gesture that was meant to be comforting, but felt like she was checking a piece of furniture for dust. "Of course you don't, dear. You've been through so much. It's been a whole year. I've given you your space to grieve, but enough is enough. I've been so worried about you rattling around in this big house all by yourself. You're not eating properly, I can tell. It's my duty to look after you. It's what she would have wanted." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart dipped in the poison of my own grief and her daughter's memory. She was using my late wife as a shield, as a justification, as a weapon to get what she wanted. And what she wanted was becoming terrifyingly clear. She breezed past me, her eyes scanning the living room with a critical air. "We'll need to make some changes, of course," she said mostly to herself. "This room gets the best morning light. I think my armchair would look lovely by that window." She pointed to the spot where my wife's favorite reading chair still sat, a soft throw blanket still draped over the arm exactly as she'd left it. A cold dread began to pool in my stomach. This wasn't a visit. This wasn't a temporary stay. This was an invasion, an occupation. "Wait," I said, finding my voice again. It was a little stronger this time. "You can't just move in." We didn't talk about this. She turned to face me, and the mask of gentle concern slipped for just a second. I saw a flash of something hard and stubborn in her eyes. Talk about what, Isaiah? There's nothing to talk about. This was my daughter's house. I have a right to be here. I'm not going to let her memory fade away while you just wallow. We're family, and family takes care of each other. Her logic was so twisted, so profoundly self-serving, that I didn't know how to argue with it. She was building a fortress of obligation and sentimentality around me, and every brick was one of my own cherished memories. She walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up a framed photo of us on the beach. She sighed dramatically. My beautiful girl. She put so much of herself into this place. It would break her heart to see it so sad. She ran a finger along the top of the frame, then looked at her fingertip with disgust. And dusty. "See, this is what I'm talking about. You can't manage on your own. Starting tomorrow, we'll do a proper deep clean, and we need to go through her clothes. It's not healthy to keep them all hanging in the closet like she's just going to walk in and wear them." That was it. That was the moment something inside me snapped. The thought of her hands on my wife's things, her judgment, her sterile solutions applied to my raw, open wounds. It was like a physical blow. The grief I was drowning in suddenly crystallized into a cold, hard diamond of absolute certainty. I couldn't live like this. I couldn't heal in a place where my grief was being policed, managed, and curated by someone who thought my healing should be on her schedule. But I knew, looking at her determined face, that arguing would be useless. It would turn into a screaming match. It would become a war of emotional blackmail with my wife's memory as the battlefield. She would call her friends. She would call relatives. She would paint me as the cruel, ungrateful son-in-law who was pushing away the grieving mother in his time of need. I would be the villain in a story she was already writing in her head. A direct confrontation was a battle I couldn't win. Not on her terms. So I did the only thing I could. I shut down. I let my face go blank. I nodded. "You're right," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "It's been hard to keep up with things." The relief on her face was immediate and absolute. The mask of concern snapped back into place. She had won, or so she thought. "I knew you'd see reason," she said, patting my arm again. "Now don't you worry about a thing. I'll go get my things from the porch. You just sit down and relax. Mama's here now. Everything is going to be all right." I watched her walk back to the front door, bustling with purpose. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, my heart hammering against my ribs. I wasn't relaxing. I was calculating. A plan, vague and formless at first, began to take shape in the back of my mind. She saw a house she could control. She saw a son-in-law she could manage. She saw her daughter's legacy, something she could possess. She didn't see me at all. She saw a project, an estate to be managed. She spent the rest of the evening directing me. Isaiah, carry this box upstairs to the guest room. No, not that one, the one on the left. That will be my room. Isaiah, where do you keep the extra blankets? Isaiah, what's for dinner? I hope it's not another one of your frozen pizzas. It was endless. She was a whirlwind of entitlement, unpacking her life into the spaces of mine, filling the silence I had grown accustomed to with her pronouncements and her sighs. I complied with it all. I was a robot. I carried her boxes. I found the blankets. I ordered a real pizza with the toppings she liked. On the outside, I was the docile, grieving man she expected me to be. But on the inside, a fire was starting to burn. It wasn't a hot, angry fire. It was a cold, quiet one, the kind of fire that forges steel. She thought she was moving into her daughter's house. She had no idea that she was simply a temporary tenant and that the landlord was about to sell the building right out from under her. That night, I lay in my bed, the bed I had shared with my wife for 10 years, and listened. I could hear her through the wall, humming to herself in her new room. The guest room. My wife's craft room. I could hear the scrape of a box being pushed across the floor, the soft thud of drawers being opened and closed. She was nesting. She was settling in for the long haul. And in that moment, listening to the sounds of my life being systematically dismantled and rearranged, I made my decision. I wasn't going to ask her to leave. I was going to leave her, and I was going to take the house with me. The very next morning, I woke up before the sun. It was T-1 month and 7 days. The humming from her room had stopped, but her presence was a heavy blanket smothering the entire house. I slipped out of bed, got dressed in the dark, and went down to the garage. Sitting in my car with the engine off in the pre-dawn quiet, I made the first call. I found a real estate agent online who specialized in fast-asses cash sales. I explained the situation briefly. I was a recent widower. The 3-bedroom house was too big, and I needed to move quickly and discreetly. I emphasized discreetly. He was professional understanding and promised to have the paperwork drawn up by noon. That was the beginning of my double life. For the next 3 weeks, I was an actor playing the part of a grieving, compliant man. By day, I endured my mother-in-law's reign. She rearranged the kitchen cabinets, complaining that my late wife and I never organized them logically. She took down photos of my friends and replaced them with more pictures of her daughter. She even tried to give away my dog, claiming it was too much for me to handle right now, until I put my foot down with a firmness that surprised us both. Every action was a small paper cut, a constant reminder that in her eyes, this wasn't my home. It was a museum dedicated to her daughter, and I was just the unfortunate, incompetent curator. But by night or in stolen moments when she went out for groceries, I was a man on a mission. I'd take hushed, urgent calls with the agent in the backyard. I'd sit in my locked car parked down the street signing digital documents on my phone, and I started to pack. I couldn't use boxes, that would be too obvious. I used gym bags and old suitcases, starting with things she would never notice. My wife's private journals from a locked box in our closet, my own college yearbooks, the goofy clay sculpture our niece made for us that my wife adored. I'd pack a bag, drive it to a small storage unit I rented a town over, and be back before she even knew I was gone. Each trip felt like smuggling a piece of my own life out of a hostile country. The agent was a miracle worker. He found a cash buyer, an investment company that wasn't interested in open houses or lengthy inspections. They made a solid offer, and I accepted it immediately. The closing date was set for T-7 days. In 1 week, the house would no longer be mine. While my mother-in-law was busy picking out new curtains for the living room, I was on my laptop using the impending proceeds to put a down payment on a 2-bedroom townhouse in a community called Summit Creek Estates. It was perfect, smaller, manageable, and most importantly, gated. Security was a feature I had never cared about before, but now it was the single most valuable amenity on the market. The final week was the hardest. The house was no longer legally mine, and I was living on borrowed time. The guilt was a physical weight, but every time she'd say something like, You know, once we get this place properly sorted, it'll finally feel like a real home. The guilt would vanish, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She wasn't just moving in, she was erasing me. The day before my escape, T-1, was move-out day. The movers were scheduled for 10 a.m. I had told my mother-in-law that I was putting our large furniture into storage to declutter, a concept she enthusiastically approved of. A brilliant idea, Isaiah. This place is so full of your things. It'll be good to get it breathing again. She had a lunch appointment and was practically giddy, telling me to make sure the movers don't scratch the walls as she left. The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, I sprang into action. It was a whirlwind. Bed, couch, desks, dressers, everything went into the truck. My secret stash from the storage unit was the last to be loaded. Within 3 hours, the house was an empty, echoing shell. The only things left were the belongings she had moved into the guest room and the food she'd put in the fridge. I walked through the empty rooms one last time, where I had lived and loved and grieved. There was no sadness, only a profound sense of relief. I wrote a simple note and left it on the kitchen counter. Went out, there's leftover lasagna in the fridge. I took one last look, closed the door behind me, and drove away. The next day, my first full day in the new place, was surreal. 0 point. I was 38 years old, sitting on the floor of my new townhouse in Summit Creek Estates, surrounded by boxes. The silence was magnificent, pure, clean, and entirely my own. I spent the morning just breathing it in, feeling the tension in my shoulders begin to unwind. Around noon, I started unpacking a box of kitchen supplies. That's when my phone rang. Her name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered. I didn't even get to say hello. "Isaiah, what is going on?" She screamed. "What's the matter?" I asked, my voice deliberately calm. "I'm at the house. The locks are changed. There are people here. Isaiah, strangers. They won't let me in. They said you sold it. You need to get down here right now and sort this out." "There's nothing to sort out," I said, placing a coffee mug into a cabinet. "I did sell it. The sale closed a week ago." There was a moment of stunned silence. I could hear a man's voice in the background, likely the new owner saying something about trespassing. Then her voice came back dripping with venomous disbelief. "You sold my daughter's house. You sold our family home without even telling me. It wasn't your house." I stated the fact as plain and simple as the wood of the cabinet in front of me. It was my house. The deed was transferred solely to my name when she passed. I sold my property. The people you're talking to are the new owners, and if you're still on their property, you need to leave before they call the police. The shriek that came through the phone was a mixture of pure fury and wounded pride. The line went dead. A second later, my phone began to buzz incessantly, with a flood of text messages, long rambling paragraphs of accusations. I was a monster, a thief. I had betrayed my wife's memory. I had stolen her daughter's legacy. I read the first few, then I put my phone on silent and went back to unpacking. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with a notification from an app I had just set up. It was the security gate for Summit Creek Estates. A visitor was at the call box. I tapped the notification and a live video feed appeared. There she was, my 64-year-old mother-in-law, her face red and contorted with anger, yelling at the security guard through her car window. She had found me, but she couldn't reach me. The gate, the keycard system, the guard, they were an impenetrable wall. She had no power here. Her reign was over. I watched as she finally gave up, slamming her hand on her steering wheel before pulling a frantic U-turn and speeding away. The physical barrier had held. Now it was time to erect the digital one. I opened my phone, went to her contact, and pressed block. Then I did the same on every social media platform. The barrage stopped. The connection was severed. The silence that returned to my townhouse was no longer just the absence of noise. It was the sound of freedom. It's been a few days. The phone has remained quiet. My new home is slowly taking shape, filled only with my memories and my hopes. This morning, I sat on my small patio with a cup of coffee, and for the first time in a year, I didn't feel like I was just surviving. I was living. I had been pushed to the edge, and instead of falling, I had built a sanctuary. And inside its quiet, peaceful walls, I can finally begin to heal.